I've lived in this country for 40 years, and if there's one thing I'm proud of, it isn't the business I built or the trucks I owned. It's the house on Fernwood Crescent in Grimsby, Ontario. The blue shutters Sandra picked in 2003. The front porch steps I poured with my own hands on a Saturday afternoon. That house held every year of our life together. Then one chilly Thursday in October, I pulled into the driveway and saw my wife standing at the front gate with a single suitcase. My name is Roland Bouchard. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil contractor across the Niagara region before retiring. If you want to know the kind of man I am, here's all you need to know. On my last day at work, my crew threw me a retirement party, and I spent more time making sure everyone else had enough to eat than celebrating myself. I've always believed the first man on the job should be the last one to leave. That's how I built my career, my home, and my family. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories reach. Life on Fernwood Crescent was the kind of peace that only comes after decades of hard work. Sandra and I had been married for 36 years. She taught elementary school and retired the year before I did. For the first time in our adult lives, we woke up with nowhere we had to be. No alarm clocks, no deadlines, just quiet mornings and evenings spent together. Sandra could silence a room with one look, then have everyone laughing 5 minutes later. She took bird feeders far more seriously than anyone should, and if you ever mention suet cakes, you'd better have an hour to spare. We have one son, Derek. He's 38, lives in Hamilton with his partner Joel, and works in real estate. Derek is smart. He understands people almost as well as he understands property. Better yet, he knows how to make bad ideas sound perfectly reasonable. That talent built his career. It also became the first warning I ignored. It started the summer before. Derek casually asked what our house might be worth in the current market. I told him I had no idea because I wasn't planning to sell it. He smiled, nodded, and dropped the subject. But something about that smile told me he'd already done the math. At a family barbecue that August, Joel remarked that a property this large must be getting harder for people our age to maintain. I laughed and told him I'd poured the front steps myself, and they were still straighter than work I'd seen from contractors half my age. He smiled and quickly moved on. By September, Derek had called 3 times in 1 week. Every conversation somehow circled back to the same question. What were Sandra and I planning to do with the house in the long run? Every time, I gave him the same answer. We planned to keep living there because it was our home. He always said he understood, claimed he was only thinking ahead, then asked again a few days later. One afternoon, while I was at the hardware store, Derek asked Sandra if she had ever spoken with a lawyer about whose name was on the deed. She looked him straight in the eye, told him that was a conversation between husband and wife, then offered him a cookie. We laughed about it later. Looking back, that should have been the moment I realized exactly what my son was after. Sandra mentioned it the way she always did when something was bothering her, but she wasn't ready to make a big deal out of it. I told her the house had always been in my name and nothing had changed. She smiled, reached for another cookie, and I told her that sounded like a good idea. A few weeks later, on a Thursday in October, I spent the afternoon in St. Catharines helping my old foreman, Frank Dooley, move equipment around his property. Frank is 71 and refuses to hire anyone because he insists nobody does the job properly. Most days, he's right. I headed home just after 6, with the quiet satisfaction that comes from putting in an honest day's work. As soon as I turned onto Fernwood Crescent, I saw Sandra standing at the front gate, not in the garden, not on the porch. At the gate, a single canvas grocery bag rested beside her. The second I stepped out of my truck, I knew something was wrong. She looked at me and said softly, "Roland, Derek was here. He brought Joel. They stayed almost 2 hours. Then she told me everything. Derek had shown up carrying a stack of documents. Later I learned they were nothing more than convincing fakes, but to a mother who trusted her own son, they looked completely legitimate. He told her the house had already been transferred into his name as part of a long-term estate arrangement. He claimed a lawyer had approved it and said the easiest thing for everyone would be for her to pack a few belongings and stay somewhere else until everything was finalized. He even told her he didn't want to make the situation unpleasant. My own son had stood in our kitchen and calmly told his mother to leave the home she had lived in for 36 years. I picked up her bag, took her hand, and walked her back inside. I sat her at the kitchen table, poured her a glass of water, cut her a slice of lemon cake, then went straight to the hall closet and grabbed my address book. The first person I called was Margaret Voss. She had been my lawyer for 11 years, and if confidence had a voice, it sounded exactly like hers. She answered on the second ring. I told her exactly what had happened without adding a single extra word. She was silent for a few seconds before saying, "The title is in your name. It has been since the day you bought that house, and it has never changed." She went on to say no one could have touched that property without her knowing. Whatever Derek had shown, Sandra was not a legal transfer, and she was willing to stake her career on it. "What do I do?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied. "Tonight you do nothing. Tonight I do everything. By tomorrow morning your son will be served with a formal trespass notice at his Hamilton address." Then her voice hardened. "Roland, he walked into your home and ordered your wife to leave. I'm taking this personally." I thanked her. She simply told me to take care of Sandra and leave the rest to her. About 40 minutes later, I called my oldest friend, Terrence Boyle. We'd known each other for 29 years, ever since we worked together in the early 90s, and we had never gone more than a couple of weeks without talking. He answered before the second ring. After I finished telling him what happened, he stayed quiet for a moment before asking, "He told Sandra to leave?" "His own mother? With one bag?" "Yes," I said. Another long silence followed. "Roland?" "I know." He asked if I was holding up. I told him I was doing a lot better than Derek was going to be the next morning. He let out a dry laugh. "Margaret's terrifying. That's exactly why I called her." He sighed. "You're not sleeping tonight." "I'll be fine," I replied. He snorted. "No, Roland. You absolutely won't." Terrence was right. I didn't sleep at all. By 7:30 the next morning, Margaret had already emailed me the draft letter. Before breakfast was over, Derek had been served with a formal trespass notice at his Hamilton address. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee when the confirmation came through. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Derek. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. This time, I answered. "Dad, I just got served with a trespass notice." "What is this?" I took a breath before answering. "Derek, I'm only going to say this once, so listen carefully. Yesterday, your mother was standing outside her own home with one grocery bag because you told her to leave. Think about that before you say another word." He immediately started talking about planning ahead, protecting the family, making practical decisions. I stopped him. "Margaret reviewed the title last night. The house is mine. It has always been mine. Nothing was transferred. There is no agreement. There isn't a single legal document that says what you told your mother it says. Do you understand?" The line went silent. "You walked into my home and scared your own mother into packing a bag. Whatever you thought was going to happen when I came home didn't happen. Here's what happens instead. You are no longer welcome on this property. That's what the notice means. Sandra and I will decide if we ever want to speak to you again, and if I were you, I wouldn't expect that decision anytime soon." "Dad, I was only trying to be practical. The future of this house is my responsibility, not yours," I replied. "Your biggest mistake wasn't lying about the paperwork. It was believing your mother would quietly accept being pushed out of her own home. She's far less forgiving than I am, and you already know I don't forgive easily." I'd spent some time thinking about that. Then I hung up. The following Monday, I met with Margaret to update my will. Derek's name came out of the estate. I asked how long the paperwork would take. She smiled and told me the revised documents were already waiting because she had a feeling I'd be walking into her office that week. I laughed and told her she was remarkable. She smiled back and said, "I know." That evening I told Sandra what I'd done. She sat quietly for a long time before saying, "That's your decision, Roland." I nodded. After another moment she whispered, "He scared me in my own kitchen." "I know. I kept hoping you'd walk through the front door." I reached across the table. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." She squeezed my hand and gave me the smallest smile. "You got there. You always do." That Saturday, Terrence came over with a coffee cake he insisted his daughter had baked, even though neither Sandra nor I believed him for a second. When Sandra told him it was delicious, he looked prouder than if he'd won a trophy. We sat on the back porch until the evening turned cold. then carried our mugs inside. While Sandra went to refill the kettle, Terrence leaned toward me and asked quietly, "How are you really doing?" I looked out the window at the maple tree in the backyard. Most of its leaves had already fallen and gathered against the fence, exactly as they did every October. Sandra had been reminding me for days to rake them. "I'm going to rake those leaves tomorrow," I said. Terrence smiled. "That's not what I asked." I nodded. "I know. I'm fine. Better than I expected to be." He didn't press any further. A moment later, Sandra returned, filled our cups, then looked at Terrence with a grin. "You baked this cake yourself, didn't you?" He cleared his throat. "It was a collaborative effort." "So that's a yes." He laughed. "Yes." Sandra settled back into her chair, wrapped both hands around her mug, and looked completely at home, like a woman who had never once packed a bag to leave that house. Seeing her that way was all I wanted.